Welcome to From the Quarries. Before I start tonight, I'd like to give a big shout out and thanks to everyone for the interaction and participation in the comments section on the videos. You probably don't see this because you don't see all the comments, but there are 40 or 50 comments a day coming through now. So firstly, I apologize if I don't respond to yours particularly, but also some of the content is extraordinary. I can honestly say I think I'm possibly learning more from the comments than I am from some of the presentations that are being put together. For that reason, I've been thinking that I'd quite like to use some of the video comments in future videos. I've got an idea in mind, I've got a topic in mind, so if you think that you would like to participate in that, let me know in the comments section, and I might send out a question through the channel next week and see what the response is from the wonderful audience out there. Enough of that, let's get to the video. Tonight's topic is the Kabbalah, a huge topic I know, and far too much for any one video, so consider tonight as just dipping our toes lightly into the waters, and there will be more videos to follow, I promise. We're looking at a chapter from a book called The Antiquity of the Holy Royal Arch by our old friend F.P. de Castells. I know last time I did a Castells video, there was some fairly negative reaction from some people, but just remember that syncretism requires tolerance and enjoy the video for what it is. De Castells has a lovely writing style, and I personally find it very easy and very enjoyable to narrate for him. So, The Antiquity of the Holy Royal Arch, it was written in 1927, and we're going to look at the chapter called Kabbalism. I hope you enjoy it.
Good evening, and welcome to tonight's presentation, From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
The suggestion has been made that Kabbalism is the parent of Freemasonry, but can that claim be substantiated? The Kabbalists are a strange people. They appear in history in a surprising manner, and they vanish almost suddenly and quite unexpectedly. Whither have they gone? They were a Jewish secret society, professing peculiar ideas about the nature of God, similar to the Gnostics of earlier days, who were also organized as a fraternity and had secrets. They felt great reverence for the volume of the sacred law, and yet they were not strict legalists. They were intensely devout, treasuring up and concealing their mystic law as something of great value. Their views differed from those of the ordinary Jew. They were syncretists, that is, believing that at bottom all religions are practically one. They sought to find common ground for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and thus harmonize their several systems of thought. Kabbalism regarded absolute deity as something unknowable, and, perhaps on this account, it might be described as the precursor of modern agnosticism. Absolute deity had neither form nor shape. It was like an elevated light, which sent forth its rays in every direction, but could only be known by its attributes, and by these taken singly and separately. It was also described as an indivisible point, without limits or dimensions of inexpressible purity and brightness. This savours of geometry, recalling Euclid's definition of the point as something without magnitude or parts. It also helps one to understand the reference of craft masons to a certain point within a circle, to which they must remain circumscribed if they would avoid error. That circle is, of course, the sphere of the universe, or of reality, and the point signifies the architect thereof. The attributes, agencies, or qualities of deity were called the sephiroth. and there were supposed to be 10 in number, presumably because the initial of the divine name was the letter numeral Yod, or 10. The Kabbalists conceived of an ocean of divinity and distinguished 3 entities of some sort as having existed ab eterno, that is, from the beginning, and they defined them with great metaphysical subtlety thus: 1. The divine substance; 2. The logos, or creative idea; and 3. The articulate creative world, or spirit, which was one with the former 2. These 3 are referred to in the Mishnah as follows: 1 is the Spirit of the living God, blessed be his name, who liveth forever. Voice, Spirit, Word, this is the Holy Ghost. And yet, although the Kabbalists distinguish these 3 things in God, they were always firm in proclaiming his unity. All throughout this system, the number 3 was very conspicuous, for in enumerating the 10 sephiroth, they began with a fundamental triad, which consisted of crown, intelligence, and wisdom. These 3 were quite distinct from the ocean of divinity that followed, and which, they said, divided itself into 7 seas, denominated love, justice, beauty, firmness, splendor, foundation, and kingdom. There were 3 dominions, or 3 witnesses, viz., the macrocosm, or universe, the microcosm, or man, and the revolution of time. But God was the centre of all things. The heavenly dragon was the pivot of the macrocosm, the heart of man was the mainspring of human nature, and the year was determined by the revolving zodiac. But these 3 converged on the point within a circle. There were 3 primordial elements, viz., ether, water, and air. The universe was said to have been brought into existence by the power of numbers, speech, and writing. The 10 sephiroth might also be divided into 3 triads, 3 times 3. For, besides the first triad already mentioned, crown, intelligence, and wisdom, which represented the intellectual world, there was a second which stood for the moral or sensuous world, beauty, love, and justice, and a third relating to the material world, splendor, firmness, and foundation. The last sephira, kingdom, expressed the harmonious combination of the various principles, potencies, or powers of the Godhead, and in practice signified the truth that God is King. Now the first of these triads finds a reflection in the 3 Grand Masters, who are said to have presided at the construction of King Solomon's temple, as we hear in craft masonry. And they reappear in the chapter, in the more definite characters of a king, a high priest, and a chief scribe or prophet. The craft mason represents those Grand Masters as 3 pillars, to which he gives the symbolic names of wisdom, strength, and beauty. And this was also done long ago by the Kabbalists, for they arranged the 10 sephiroth so as to suggest 3 pillars, actually calling them pillars. Thus, intelligence, justice, splendor; crown, beauty, foundation, kingdom; wisdom, love, firmness. The one on the left was called the pillar of judgment, the one on the right was the pillar of mercy, and the central one was the pillar of benignity. In the craft, we make much of the twin pillars, Boaz on the left and Jachin on the right, but very little is ever said about the central one, the master pillar. On the other hand, when we enter into the chapter, everything seems to be subordinated to that pillar in the centre, and the other 2 seem to have been forgotten. The sephiroth suggested to the Kabbalists the idea of a God-man, the heavenly Adam, who, they said, was the pattern after which all men had been created. And whatever men might be like now, either morally or spiritually, eventually they would all reproduce that ideal character, the attributes which the sephiroth stand for, sharing the kingdom in the bosom of the archetypal man. And this seems to be the thought, too, that underlies the raising ceremony. For when the Master Mason is raised, he is supposed to attain that ideal, and then he is reunited with the Master Man and all those who have gone through the same experience. Before a man reaches that point, however, he has 3 distinct tests, 3 transmigrations. The first and the second reincarnations might prove a slip, but the third time the purified soul is reunited with the heavenly Adam by a loving kiss. That is, by a symbol of perfect unity and concord. For, undoubtedly, the raising ceremony is derived from the Kabbalists. There is still extant a lecture 600 or 700 years old, which used to be rehearsed at the reception of candidates. It is called the Idra Rabbah. The copy that has been preserved for these 600 years was used on some memorable occasion not specified. And, as in the case of the Sefer Zohar, it purports to be a discourse by Simon bin Jochai to the adepts of the mystical science who came to him for enlightenment. The Idra Rabbah is not a long discourse, but at the end of it there is a postscript informing us that during the recital 3 brethren have died. There is no lamentation, no regret, only the bald statement that the brethren have died in that short interval while the lecture was being rehearsed. Here, then, we have the figurative death of the Master Mason. Here we infer that in ancient times it was required that there should be 3 candidates going together through that ceremony, even as in the Royal Arch Chapter 2 there are 3 Master Masons from Babylon who go through practically the same experience. We have seen that in Kabbalism everything went by 3s, as in Freemasonry. Agreeably with this very ancient precedent, the old American ritual provided that there must always be 3 candidates for exaltation, neither more nor less. Our interpretation of the postscript in the Idra Rabbah is confirmed by other documents, which state that, at this ceremony, the terrestrial was brought into connection with the celestial, and that the candidate came into union with the spirits of great men, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Aaron, David, Solomon, etc., who were supposed to be present and possibly were personated by the companions. And he then was said to be reunited with the great worthies of past times, the former companions of his toil. Idra Rabbah was the manual of the Great Assembly, but on less solemn occasions the Kabbalists used another manual called the Idra Sutta, the Small Assembly. With the Kabbalists, 7 was a symbolic number as much as 3 was. Thus, the Temple of Solomon was said to stand in the midst of the world, with the 4 points of the compass, east, west, north, and south round about. And these, with the temple itself, and with the addition of height and depth, the Shekinah glory above and the vault below gave a total of 7, or a heptad of ideas. They pointed out that in Genesis 1 verse 2 there are only 7 Hebrew words, and they explained it as an allusion to the 7 mansions of paradise. They expressed the idea of the Grand Lodge above by speaking of the Sanctum Sanctorum of the 7 halls, wherein one day, they said, the whole plethora of souls, cleansed and purified, would be reunited with the highest soul, reincorporated into the bosom of the infinite source whence they emanated. This is foreshadowed in the way we advance in the Royal Arch chapter when we march towards the source of light, for then we traverse 7 regions which end with the Sanctum Sanctorum proper. The Kabbalistic book Sefer Zohar was at one time known as the Midrash, or exposition of the words, "Let there be light." Now, we may inquire, how old is this Kabbalistic system? The question is a debatable one, but we shall briefly state the facts. The Sefer HaZohar professes to be the work of Simon bin Jochai, who flourished in AD 70 to 110, and was the embodiment of Jewish mysticism at that distant period. But we accept Dr. Ginsburg's verdict that it is a pseudograph of the 13th century. The book, however, is merely a commentary on the doctrines of this theosophy, which, at the time when it was composed, had already a very respectable number of adherents. The Yetzirah, or Book of Creation, is a much earlier work. Rabbi Jehuda LaLevi, who was born about 1086, knew of it and attributed it to Abraham. That sounds fabulous, but it is not an incredible thing, as we shall see. It is commonly believed to be a product of the 9th century, of the Christian era, but on reading it, as in the case of the Zohar, we find that at the time when it was written, Kabbalism was already considered an ancient science which had been handed down orally from generation to generation. The Talmud mentions a book called Yetzirah, and if the work we know be identical with that mentioned in the Talmud, its age would have to be put back from the 9th to the 2nd century. The Yetzirah of the Talmud was undoubtedly of Babylonian origin, for it propounded some speculations on the artificial production of plants and metals, which had been borrowed from a book written by one Gautami about BC 1400, under the title of Agricultura Nabat. This comes measurably near to the times of Abraham, and recalls the opinion of Jehuda HaLevi. Of course, our Yetzirah may be a fragment or a rehash or a paraphrase of the original work. Anyhow, the book itself shows that Kabbalism was very ancient, even in the 9th century. It will be interesting to the reader to hear that in the Jewish Encyclopedia it is stated that the apocalyptic literature of the 2 centuries preceding the Christian era contains the chief elements of the Kabbalah. Kabbalism, like the Royal Arch, was much concerned with the name of God. After the destruction of the temple by the Romans, when the Jewish priests gave up the practice of uttering the divine name because they felt that they were not worthy, they adopted in its place a 12-letter cryptogram, which they deliberately pronounced so rapidly that those within hearing distance could not perceive what they said. This secret name was communicated only to the most pious of the priests, and there is evidence to show that it was not lost, but continued to be in use in the Middle Ages, many centuries after. In addition to this 12-letter name, however, we hear about another divine name, which the Kabbalists made much mystery of, one of 42 letters, which was only communicated to such as are pious, not easily provoked, not given to drinking, and not self-opinionated. He who holds this name and preserves it inviolate is beloved above, cherished below, and respected of every creature, and he is heir to both worlds, the world that is now and the world that is to come. Maimonides observed long ago that the 42 letters cannot possibly make one single word, and that they must, therefore, have composed several words. There is no doubt that these words convey certain ideas, which were designed to bring man nearer to the conception of the divine essence. Moral qualifications and a great preparation are required. The sentiment expressed by the words on the screen recalls what we say. Maimonides may or may not have known the name, but he evidently knew of the stringent conditions under which the great secret was communicated to the initiates. Now, the erudite Frank has been able to identify this name as the 10 sephiroth, proving thereby that the sephiroth are at least 18 centuries old, the age of the Talmud. Someone overlooking this most convincing solution has advocated the theory that the 42 letters in question were 10 divine appellations from the Hebrew Scriptures. But how can he be sure of the 10 divine appellations he gives? What is there especially in favour of them? In the Old Testament, the divine appellations are very numerous, and if we are allowed to choose 10 at will, it will be easy to make several combinations, each of which will total 42 letters. In the case of the 10 sephiroth, however, we have a unique formula, which admits of no elasticity, which was of great significance for the Kabbalists, and, including the vowel conjunctive before the last sephirah, it yields exactly 42 letters, neither more nor less. It may be asked whether this can be described as a name of God. But the sephiroth were the enumeration of the attributes of God by which alone a man could know him, and that is usually what is meant by a name. The Kabbalist also said that if a man penetrated the significance of the name, he would receive 6 yods, the initial of YHWH repeated 6 times, in the pure sky, 3 to the left and 3 to the right, north and south, and 3 vows hovering over the heavenly arch, 9 letters altogether, or 3 for each of the 3 pillars, which they conceived as arranged in a line from north to south. That is, wisdom, benignity or beauty of character, and strength. The heavenly arch was supposed to be marked by the 3 vows in the central pillar, recalling the 3 archstones in the vault. Dr. Ginsburg explains these 9 letters as referring to the priestly benediction which was supposed to follow those who had mastered the secret of the 42-letter name. Such a man, too, would perceive in the morning towards the west a pillar hanging perpendicularly over the earthly paradise, and, simultaneously, a second pillar hanging over the centre of the true paradise, this latter being luminous. This reference to the 2 pillars is difficult to explain, but we may recall that at the porchway of the Temple of Melkarth at Tyre, there were 2 pillars, and according to Herodotus, one of them was luminous, emitting a bright light at night. All the great Talmudists of Spain in the Middle Ages were Kabbalists, and were fully persuaded of the high antiquity of their craft. This fact recalls the record there is of some Spanish Jews who, having emigrated from Holland to the American colonies in the year 1658, are said to have conferred the degrees of Masonry on some of their number after a service in their synagogue. That they were Spanish Jews, Sephardim, is clearly proved by their names. And so, the record is an undesignated piece of evidence showing how some of the descendants of the medieval Kabbalists, who were expelled from Spain at the close of the 15th century, had wandered far and wide, to England, to Holland, and America, and there promoted the old art under the new name of Masonry. It is in the 15th century, when Kabbalism disappears, that Freemasonry comes into view. Dr. Ginsburg asserts that the Kabbalah became partially known to Christians between the years 1463 and 1494 through Raymond Lully, but his chronology needs rectifying, for he instances Pico de Mirandola as having become a Kabbalist. Now, when Pico de Mirandola was born in 1463, Raymond Lully had already been dead nearly 150 years. Clearly, this spread of Kabbalism among Christians must be antedated. Lully was initiated in the 13th century, and there is no telling what influences were set in motion by that wonderful man. And yet, it is true that the Kabbalah was only partially revealed to Christians. They were not capable of exploring all its mysteries. Pico de Mirandola embraced Kabbalistic ideas through a rabbi, Jochanan Ailman, who had come to Italy from Constantinople, but had come in contact with Spanish-speaking Jews, for he bore a surname that, although Spanish, points to him having originated in Germany, for Ailman means German. Pico de Mirandola initiated Reuchlin, of whom we know that he relied on geometry as one of the aids for diffusing the speculative science, holding that the tetrad stands for the 4 elements of geometrical matter, viz., the point, the line, the surface, and the solid. Reuchlin wrote a book which is now of the greatest rarity, De Verbo Mirifico, under the symbolic name of Capnio, in which he expressed the opinion that the tetrad, or tetractys, that is, the holy quaternion of Pythagoras, arose from the sacred 4-letter name of God, the Tetragrammaton. He also maintained the Pythagoras veneration of the decad, as opposed from the tetrad, was founded on the 10 sephiroth, the Hebrew letter numeral Yod being not only the initial of YHWH, but the number of the sephiroth, for Yod stands for 10. He claimed that Pythagoras was one of the masters of the speculative science of the Kabbalists, as the medieval Masons also claimed him to be a master of theirs. That was Kabbalism by F. de P. Castells. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe and all that stuff, but more importantly, can you let me know whether you think the idea of using comments to create a new video is a good one or not? I'd love to do it. I think the response I get from the audience will give some really keen learnings. So let me know and I'll follow up. In any case, if you'd like to know more about From the Quarries, come and visit our website at www.fromthequarries.com, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.